Is there anything about Islam that you've perhaps seen or witnessed or heard that maybe, you thought, well, is this part of their religion, or what's going on there? Is there anything like that perhaps you've discovered or seen? You must have seen a lot of things. Come on.
Can you explain the women being covered?
So in Islam, in the Quran, Allah says, tell the believing man to lower his gaze. So the first hijab or veil is placed on the man. Don't feast your eyes on women. And as a man, you know when a man is looking at a woman, automatically, some of the things that perhaps going through his head, not necessarily very respectful. In fact, many of our thoughts, we would struggle to tell our mothers or our sisters or our daughters or our wives, because that's the nature of man. That's how we're wired, okay? So the first hijab, the first, a sense of modesty is placed upon the man. And Allah links believing. In other words, if you are a true believer, lower your gaze. Don't gawp, don't stare, don't feast your eyes and think things that are inappropriate, basically. And tell the believing woman to dress modestly. So there's a responsibility placed upon both. Now, throughout all of human history, you find that women actually covered their hair. If you watch a video of England, even if a person was not particularly religious, they'd always have a scarf. That was just seen as modesty. It was seen as a modest way. It was the norm throughout all of human history. It's actually a very modern phenomena, which has become fashionable because of, pop culture and media and everything else, where actually now it's seen perfectly modest not to have your hair covered, and perhaps even dress in clothes that perhaps most of us wouldn't want our daughters to dress in. Let's put it that way, right? And it's seen perfectly okay. But in Islam, this responsibility is placed upon both the man and the woman. By the way, the man has modest dress as well. So he shouldn't wear very figure-hugging clothes. He shouldn't be showing his aura, which is from his navel to his knees. That should always remain covered, especially in public. So there are controls on both. But the woman's hair ultimately is seen as a very, let's say, it's a sign of beauty. That's why women spend many hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on hair treatments and things like, to make her hair look really, really nice, because it's a feature to attract people by. And in Islam, we say that a woman's value is not in the way she looks. It's not in her beauty, but in her taqwa, her closeness to God, and her etiquettes, her manners, her decorum, her intelligence, her capacity to reason and to do things. That is of value. The looks, the outwardly looks, are not what she should be judged by. But today, we basically have thrown that right over. A woman now is valued more on how she looks, and often could be more successful, even in the workplace, because of her beauty rather than her ability. And in Islam, we say that's wrong. It should be what's inside that matters. The substance, the very core of that individual, their values, not what's on the outside. And it's very difficult, you see, to have that as a principle and as a rule, if basically the women are dressed in a way, and I'm not just talking about the hair, of course, in a way that would clearly, let's say, not encourage men to treat that person with the respect and the dignity that they should be affording them. Now, I'm not saying that a woman deserves to be disrespected if she's not dressed appropriately. I'm not saying that, because in Islam that would be forbidden, because you're told to lower your gaze. You're not supposed to be looking at her in the first place anyway. But, we have a 6-second rule, right? We are told that a person will basically judge somebody within 6 or 8 seconds. What are they basing that on? Appearance, right? And we're told, no, don't do that. Now, one of the other reasons that we're given in the Quran, that so the woman will not be harassed. She will not be molested or harassed. Now, there are actually studies done where a woman dressed in clothing that would be generally agreed upon in the West is okay, right? Somewhat revealing or figure hugging or whatever. And she was harassed for, I think, something like more than once every minute. She had an inappropriate comment or an inappropriate look. And that same woman, they put her hijab on and just made her dress a little bit more modestly, let's say, for argument's sake. She wasn't harassed once. There were studies done where women hid cameras to see how many times they were touched inappropriately in a club. And this woman, I think she afterwards did the count, and it was something like 200 times. Somebody either deliberately brushed past or touched her or whatever. Now in Islam, this is haram, it's forbidden. But this is in a society where there are laws that say that that's prohibited, yet that still is going on. I would say that's inherently disrespectful to a woman. But you see, in the West, we're told it's disrespectful to ask her to dress modestly. And I would say, I'm sorry, but you got it the wrong way round. And ultimately, you know what I say to people? It doesn't matter what I think or what he thinks or she thinks or you think or what anybody thinks. Because our sense of morality or what we find as reasonable is based upon social consensus, generally speaking. If the fashion is this, it's okay. If most of the influencers are doing this, it's generally okay, it's acceptable. And if it's something else, then it moves. It's a very fluid thing. But what we say is that what you need to establish is, did God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, actually tell me to behave in a particular way or not? That's what's important. Because if God didn't, then it doesn't matter whether you wear the hijab or you don't wear the hijab, or you dress in a certain way or you don't dress in a certain way. But if you establish that actually, you know what, I'm convinced that this book is from God, and I'm convinced that God has told me to dress in modesty, and general consensus within scholarship is that this is what is deemed as modest, then I should do that, because the creator of the heavens and the earth has told me to do that. And I think for me, that's what's important. So the Muslim man is told to grow a beard. Now, it may be very unfashionable at certain times in history to have a beard, right? But I don't care. Because for me, I've established that God instructed me that all of the prophets were told to have beards. Muslim man should have a beard. Ordain a beard. So for me, it's irrelevant. I have to wake up in the morning at 4 o'clock in the morning and pray my first prayer. It's not always easy if I've slept at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? It's a hard thing to do. But I do it because I was instructed by God Almighty, the heavens and the earth, that this is ordained for you. You have to do this. So what I would say to people is that sometimes people do get caught up in the rules, let's say, of how you have to be. Like, oh, you can't eat pork, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and I have to dress in a particular way or whatever. I would say those things are not reasons to accept or deny something. The reasons to accept or deny something is whether actually it's grounded in truth or not. Those are the reasons you should accept or deny something. My own personal sensibilities don't matter, quite frankly, because if I was born 100 years ago, those personal sensibilities would be very different. Probably you'd all be wearing scarves. That's how it would be, because that just would be the norm, you see. And it's also very interesting. Look, if you look at any picture of Mary, the mother of Jesus, does she have her lovely hair out, all in curls and fully make-up? No, she doesn't. She always has her hair covered with that scarf. So we believe that this was something that was ordained for people before as well. This is nothing new. And in fact, Allah mentions this about fasting. So in the Quran, Allah says, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for people before you. In other words, don't worry, it's nothing new. It was given to people before as well, and you have to do it as well.
And then it carries on, it says, so that you gain God
Yes,
consciousness.
Jazakallah khair, thank you. It's very important actually that you add that. So you may attain God consciousness, a connection to God. So it increases your spirituality. And the reason why it does that is because things that are ordinarily allowed to eat, to drink, to have intimate relations with your husband or your wife, during that fast period, you can't do any of that. And so what it does do is it teaches you restraint. And that level of restraint is constantly a reminder that you're doing it for the sake of Allah, you're doing it for the sake of God. So then when you're outside of the fasting month, that tends to stay with you. That sort of connection, that closeness. That if I'm going to do some evil act, if I'm going to speak to somebody rudely or swear at somebody or steal something, actually, you know, God's watching me. God's recording everything. So I must be a good person, basically.
So when you live your life, you're living your life being conscious of God, that God is always aware of your actions. So you try to be the best person you can, essentially. So that's essentially Islam. Islam is to be good, be charitable, be good to your neighbour, respect your parents, respect have good ethics and manners. Nobody's perfect, but you try to do as best
You aspire to do, and in fact, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said many times, but in particular once he said exclusively, I have not been sent but to perfect your character. It was about polishing the character, improving the character. Everyone really is a gem, but they become muddy, clouded, influenced by the world and its trinkets and its interests and what have you. What Islam does is it polishes the gem and it brings it back to its gleaming reality. And that perfecting of character is one of the ways of perfecting and getting those facets back to where they need to be, and unclouding that gem, taking away all the dirt that the worldly life and all its stresses and strains and interests and pleasures that basically influence that person. And so that's why you find it's a very transformative way of life, because you'll find even in the US, for example, you'll have people who are in prison and they'll come into Islam, and when they come out of prison, from when they went into prison, will be a complete transformation, because it's now they're not accountable to Joe Biden or the legal system or the police, but now they're accountable to the Creator. So it changes their perspective. And so, it's a very, very transformative thing. But it's interesting that brother brought that up, that character and having a good character with etiquette, manners, decorum, and treating one another with kindness and with fairness and justice is very, very profound. In America, in Harvard, they wanted to put onto the wall the faculty of law, I think in the canteen, if I remember rightly, they wanted to choose 3 statements from history on justice, on the matter of law, legality. And they selected one of the verses from the Quran. And that verse is, O ye who believe, stand up as witnesses to Allah, even against yourselves, against your parents, your kin, whether one is rich or poor. In other words, hold yourself first to account and condemn yourself if you've done something wrong. And even if it's your parents, and even if it's your kin, and even if it's your associates, whether one is rich or poor, regardless, be just. And that statement, now one could say, well, okay, that's great, but the statement came presumably from a man in a desert who was known for herding goats, a shepherd, just like many of the other prophets were, who was known to be illiterate, and then he comes up with pearls of wisdom that even Faculty of Law, Harvard, for example, is recognizing as one of the 3 most profound statements of justice. Sorry, in Harvard.
No, I mean, it's always say you to believe.
Say again, I can't hear you, brother.
The verse.
The verse says, O ye who believe, if you can bring it up.
We're at in America?
We're in Harvard, in the University of...
I thought you were saying in America.
No, so in the Faculty of Law, they wanted to choose 3 statements in history that would represent something that was profound within the system of justice, basically. And they actually chose this verse of the Quran. What verse is it?
Surah An-Nisa, verse 135.
Yeah.
It says, all believers stand firm for justice as witnesses for Allah, even if it is against yourselves, your parents, or close relatives. Be they rich or poor, Allah is the best to ensure their interests. So do not let your desires cause you.
I'm going to give this back, not because of anything you said, but simply I'm remembering that I have a limited amount of space in my bags to travel back. But I appreciate your words. I did struggle a little bit with your first sentiment. You talked about how men are biologically wired a certain
Yes.
way. I'm very well studied in the
Right.
sciences, and
Right.
I think that almost becomes a fallback for certain folks to say that.
Yes.
And I think actually it's much more cultural than it is biological. So I might maybe think about the wording
That's
of that.
fine, but there are a lot of studies that have been done on this.
Sure.
And what the studies seem to show is that even the dynamics of entering into an intimate relationship, the dynamics are very different between a man and a woman.
Right.
So a man, and I don't want to be too explicit, and obviously,
Sure. Yeah, no.
but a man, for example, may have a woman who may give him an opportunity there and then, and be quite prepared to go for it.
Sure.
Yes. Most women probably wouldn't do that.
Oh, I wasn't agreeing.
No, no.
with you. Yeah, no. I
I'm
think
saying-
a lot of it once again is cultural. Like
Yeah, no, what I'm trying to say to you is that the
yeah.
very dynamics of how we
Sure.
act and how
Yeah.
we are is actually very different.
Sure. No, I'm not disagreeing with
Yeah,
that. I think,
yeah.
like, we are unique in that sense. But I think the language that you're starting to say becomes a fallback and can actually further perpetuate some issues in cultures.
You see, the thing is, I understand where you're getting at,
Sure.
right? I can understand that it can
but
become an
as
excuse.
someone who's like very embedded in the
Yes.
science, I struggle with
I understand.
statements like that
I understand.
because I think
you know what it is?
Yeah.
You're very right. Some people could use that as an excuse to justify behaving in a certain way. First of all, I believe Islam nips that in the bud anyway, to
Sure.
be fair.
Yeah, yeah.
But secondly, you can have something that is a reality that can be misused as well.
Right.
So just because someone misuses something doesn't mean it's not the reality.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. There are people who are anti-Zionist, for example. They don't believe in the political strain of justifying the state of Israel. But they're not necessarily anti-Jewish.
Sure.
They're not anti-Semites. But there are anti-Semites who become anti-Zionist, and they justify anti-Semite, let's say, rhetoric by masking it to be anti-Zionist. Do you understand my point? But that does not mean that if you're anti-Zionist, you're automatically going to be anti-Semite. But so for example, people might believe that certain cultures, certain people may have certain inclinations or interests because of their culture or whatever, but they might not necessarily be racist. But then you'll get a racist who would perhaps overemphasize that to then make a person lesser or greater in terms of value, and they're masking that and they're hiding it. So what I'm trying to explain to you is that men are different from women.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
And I'm not trying to disagree
And
with
even
that.
when it comes to intimacy, we're very different actually.
Sure. Yeah.
But I agree with you that there might be some men who will misuse that then. So for example, there are men who are in my view, are absolutely disgusting. And they'll say, oh, because she was dressed like that, that's why it happened to her. And I would say that you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't say that she somewhat deserved it because she was dressed like that, or she deserved it because she was a little bit tipsy. Nobody deserves that. But everybody has a responsibility. I wouldn't wear £1 million watch and walk down Soho at midnight,
No.
because I'd probably get a knife on my throat and the watch taken from me. And it happened to somebody that I know. Literally, when there was a crowd of people on a Saturday night, he had a Breitling watch, not £1 million watch, but there were 4 guys, one put a knife and they stole his watch because they saw the watch. So the point that I'm trying to make to you is that what Islam says is that a woman's value is not in her beauty.
Right.
And
I
that,
agree.
and one of the
100%.
reasons is that she may get harassed more and she may potentially get molested more if she's dressed in a particular way. And it's not just about covering of the hair, obviously. Now, that does not mean to say that it's okay for men to do that. But what we have to recognize is that within every society, there are always going to be a group of people who are not going to conform to decency, and they're not going to conform to any law. And it doesn't matter how hard the law is, how much it prescribes a particular way, you're always going to get people who will break that law. They might have mental illness, they may have drug addiction, they may be alcoholics, they may have all sorts of problems, or they just might be very evil people, bad people. So what Islam does is it sets a principle and a rule that recognizes the reality of how things are, not how we would like them to be. Because I hear this all the time in the West. Women should be able to dress as they want, do what they want. If she wants to walk home at 2 o'clock in the morning from a nightclub and she's got a mini skirt on, a little bra top on, so what? That's her right. She should be able to do it. And I would say, are you mad? Are you crazy? Are you absolutely out of your mind? Are you living out of the reality that there are evil people out there? And that, yes, it's wrong for that person to do anything to that person, but if you make it so easy and available for somebody, then unfortunately the reality is that some idiot, some lawbreaker, some pervert has a chance now where maybe before he wouldn't have had the chance. So the responsibility should be on both, of course.
Yeah, I understand.
So, but I agree with you.
I still struggle with the sentiment.
Well, look, I agree with you. And to be honest,
I think it also perpetuates shame.
Look, in Islam, we don't live in this concept of being in perpetual shame, or the other thing is very important, I think. And in the West, I think we get this wrong a lot.
Sure.
So when a woman is covering herself up, she says, "I am not ashamed of my body. I'm not ashamed of how I look." There's a very big difference between having shame and being ashamed. Because if you're ashamed of your body, you feel inferior. You feel lesser than perhaps somebody else. Okay, but to have shame is to have modesty. There's a difference. The two are not, they shouldn't be conflated. So, and most of us, we have our own limits. Most of us have our own limits as to what we think is modest. What you might decide to wear, what you might decide to wear, may be very different from what somebody else might choose to wear. You may look at somebody and actually think, you know what, that's really inappropriate. I mean, there's nothing left for the imagination, right? And if your man is with you, your husband is with you, your son is with you, your boyfriend is with you, whatever, you wouldn't want that person right in their face. You wouldn't want that. So we all have our limits, but what we believe is that the best limit setter, or the setting of those limits, the best person or the best thing to do that is the one that knows you intimately more than you know yourself, which is the Creator. And so if He says this is good for you, then it has to be good for you. But the important thing is that you need to first establish, did the Creator say that?
Right.
Okay? And so this is why the Quran is a very interesting verse. It says, when Allah and His Prophet have decided on a matter, it is not befitting, it's not correct for you to choose something else. Because if Allah has indeed said this, or the Prophet has taught this, then it's not befitting for you to choose something else other than what they've told you. But the realization of whether God actually said that is the challenge. And that's what you need to investigate.
Sure.
That's the first step.
Yeah, I agree.
And if you're convinced of that, then to be honest, everything else is, well, if God told me to do that, and I can establish God did tell me to do that.
At that point, it's faith.
Why here I obey? Because I know it's good for me, even if I don't understand it, even if my cultural sensibilities have changed over the centuries, and today they're very different from my mother's or my grandmother's, okay? I can't inherently say, as a matter of fact, that my grandmother's values were wrong, because that was her social consensus. Your social consensus is different. Your great-granddaughter may look back at you, okay, and think you were very, why was she doing that? I think that was so wrong. But your social consensus is agreeing on what you're doing today, right? So we believe that social consensus is not what should guide our morality or what's right or wrong, but actually the Creator of the heavens and the earth.
Thank you for the discussion. I think that's about
Sorry,
time
I probably
for me.
spoke too much.
No. I mean, I have more to listen and to say about the subject.
Very nice
so
to meet you guys.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
We're not encouraged to shake sisters' hands. The reason for that is that out of respect. So it's we're not allowed to touch any woman if we're not married to her. She's not our mother, our daughter, or our sister. Beyond that, we're not permitted to touch anybody. And interestingly, just before you go, because I know you want to go now, but interestingly now in universities and colleges, lecturers are being told that when you're speaking to a student by themselves, leave the door open. Actually, this is one of the Islamic values, that a man should not be alone with a woman you should have the door open where it should be a public, where people are walking past, it's okay. But it should not be concealed, it should be private in a shut place. One of the other things that in England we're discussing now is that in corporate companies, they're discussing maybe we should not have handshakes. Because sometimes it can potentially lead to issues where a woman feels that it wasn't appropriate the way perhaps her hand was being shaken. But this is something that we have been told about in the 7th century. So yeah, just something else to be. Look, you haven't got a lot of space in your luggage, but at least take that.
Sure. All right. I'll meet you there. Cool.
We've got a YouTube channel.
Okay.
If you get a chance, just give them a card. Check us out.
Okay.
If you would like to have a private discussion or you want to ask other questions, it doesn't have to be on camera. It doesn't have to be, it can be completely private. But we would love for you to interact if you have any other further questions. But it was a real pleasure to meet you guys. Yeah.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And my apologies if I spoke too much. I often get told, let them come back to you, and I don't do that. So I'm really
If you have any
apologetic.
further questions, just email us. I could email them or something.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you guys.